The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor as Elena Vasquez quietly pushed her cleaning cart through the opulent corridors of the Belmont Country Club. Her worn sneakers made no sound against the polished stone, a skill she had perfected over 3 years of working the late shift. Tonight was different, though. Through the towering mahogany doors of the grand ballroom, she could hear the gentle murmur of conversation mixed with the soft clinking of champagne glasses. The annual autumn gala was in full swing, and inside those doors sat the most influential people in the entire state. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena paused outside the ballroom entrance, adjusting the industrial cleaning supplies on her cart. At 28, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned to navigate life's storms without making waves. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her navy uniform bore the subtle creases that came from being washed in a coin laundry too many times. She had learned long ago that invisibility was her greatest asset in places like this. The Belmont Country Club sat perched on a hill overlooking the city like a fortress of privilege. Its stone facade and sprawling gardens had hosted governors, senators, and captains of industry for over a century. Tonight's gala was raising funds for the Regional Youth Orchestra, and the guest list read like a who's who of political and financial power. Each ticket cost more than Elena made in 2 months. She pushed through the service entrance into the ballroom, immediately struck by the overwhelming grandeur. The ceiling soared 30 feet above, adorned with hand-painted murals depicting scenes from classical mythology. Massive floral arrangements filled every corner, with the scent of imported roses and orchids. Round tables draped in ivory silk accommodated groups of elegantly dressed guests, their jewelry catching the light from dozens of candles. Elena moved methodically between the tables, emptying ashtrays and replacing linens with practiced efficiency. The conversations flowed around her like water around a stone. She heard discussions about art acquisitions, political campaigns, and business mergers worth millions of dollars. These people inhabited a world where decisions made over dessert could affect thousands of lives. A woman in a burgundy gown complained about her decorator's inability to find the right shade of marble for her 3rd bathroom renovation. At the next table, a man in a tailored tuxedo expressed frustration that his yacht club was booked solid through next summer. Elena listened to these problems while calculating whether she could afford both groceries and her daughter's school supplies this week. Her daughter Sophia was everything to Elena. At 6 years old, the little girl possessed a curiosity about the world that never failed to amaze her mother. Sophia would spend hours drawing elaborate pictures of castles and dragons, making up stories about brave princesses who saved kingdoms through kindness rather than magic. She attended the local elementary school, where Elena volunteered in the library whenever her work schedule allowed. The two of them lived in a modest apartment on the other side of town, where the buildings were functional rather than beautiful, and the neighbors looked out for each other's children. Their home was small but filled with love, laughter, and Sophia's artwork covering every available wall space. Elena had turned their tiny living room into Sophia's personal art gallery, displaying each drawing with the same care museums showed priceless masterpieces. Elena's path to single motherhood had been neither planned nor easy. Sophia's father had left when their daughter was barely 2 years old, unable to handle the responsibilities that came with parenthood. The abandonment had been devastating, but it had also revealed Elena's own strength. She discovered reserves of determination she never knew existed, working multiple jobs to provide for Sophia while maintaining the stable, loving home every child deserved. Working at the Belmont Country Club was Elena's primary source of income. The cleaning job paid decent wages and offered health insurance, luxuries in the world of service work. She typically worked the evening shift, arriving after the business meetings and social functions had concluded to restore the club to its pristine condition for the next day's events. The work was physically demanding, but allowed her to be home when Sophia woke up and to take her to school each morning. During the day, Elena worked part-time at a local music store called Harmony House. The shop specialized in instrument sales and repair, catering to students and amateur musicians throughout the community. Elena's job involved customer service, inventory management, and basic instrument maintenance. The pay was modest, but she loved being surrounded by music and helping people find instruments that would bring joy to their lives. What none of her co-workers at either job knew was that Elena possessed a musical gift that had shaped her entire life. She had been playing piano since the age of 4, when her grandmother had taught her simple melodies on an old upright piano in their family's cramped apartment. Music had been Elena's escape during a childhood marked by her parents' financial struggles and her father's battle with alcoholism. Her grandmother, Isabella Morales, had been a classically trained pianist in her native Venezuela before immigrating to the United States in the 1960s. Despite working double shifts in a textile factory, Isabella had maintained her musical skills and passed them on to her granddaughter with unwavering dedication. Every evening after dinner, she would sit with young Elena at the piano, patiently teaching her scales, chord progressions, and eventually complex classical pieces. Under her grandmother's guidance, Elena had blossomed into a remarkable pianist. She could read music as fluently as words and had memorized dozens of classical compositions by the time she reached high school. Her playing possessed a rare combination of technical precision and emotional depth that impressed teachers and audiences alike. Music wasn't just a hobby for Elena, it was the language through which she expressed her deepest feelings and most cherished dreams. During high school, Elena had earned a partial scholarship to study music at the State University. Her piano instructor, Dr. Margaret Chen, had seen enormous potential in the young woman and encouraged her to pursue performance as a career. Elena had dreamed of playing in concert halls, recording albums, and sharing her love of music with audiences around the world. For a brief moment, that future had seemed within reach. Everything changed during Elena's sophomore year of college, when her grandmother suffered a massive stroke. Isabella had been Elena's anchor, her inspiration, and her closest friend. Watching the vibrant woman who had taught her to find beauty in music struggle with basic speech and movement was heartbreaking. Elena dropped out of college to care for her grandmother full-time, putting her musical ambitions on indefinite hold. Isabella lived for another 2 years, during which Elena provided round-the-clock care, while working part-time jobs to pay for medical expenses and basic necessities. Her grandmother's final words to her had been in Spanish: "La música vive en tu corazón, mía, no la dejes morir." Music lives in your heart, my daughter. Don't let it die. After Isabella's death, Elena had felt lost and directionless. She was 21 years old, with no degree, limited work experience, and a musical education that seemed irrelevant to the practical demands of survival. That's when she met Sophia's father, a charming man who promised her stability and companionship. Their relationship had been passionate but turbulent, marked by his inability to commit to anything long-term. When Sophia was born, Elena experienced a love more profound than anything she had ever felt. Holding her daughter for the first time, she understood that her purpose in life had fundamentally shifted. She was no longer just Elena the aspiring musician, she was Elena the mother, protector, and provider. Every decision from that point forward would be made with Sophia's well-being as the primary consideration. The years following Sophia's birth had been a constant juggling act of work, childcare, and financial management. Elena had learned to stretch every dollar, shop at discount stores, and find creative ways to make their small apartment feel like a palace. She sang lullabies to Sophia every night, the same songs her grandmother had sung to her decades earlier, keeping the musical tradition alive, even as her own performance dreams faded into memory. Elena still owned her grandmother's piano, a 1950s Baldwin upright that had been carefully moved from apartment to apartment over the years. The instrument was Elena's most treasured possession, a tangible connection to Isabella and to the musical heritage that had shaped her identity. Late at night, after Sophia had fallen asleep, Elena would sit at the piano and play softly, her fingers remembering melodies that transported her back to simpler times. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She played for her own healing and remembrance, but also to maintain skills that had once been the center of her world. Elena practiced scales and arpeggios to keep her technique sharp, worked through Bach inventions to maintain her classical foundation, and occasionally attempted more challenging pieces that pushed her abilities. Playing piano was both a source of comfort and a reminder of roads not taken. Sophia loved listening to her mother play and often fell asleep to the gentle sounds of Chopin nocturnes or Debussy preludes floating from the living room. The little girl had begun showing interest in learning piano herself, and Elena had started teaching her basic finger positions and simple melodies. Watching Sophia's face light up when she successfully played a scale or simple song reminded Elena why music mattered so much. Tonight at the Belmont Country Club, Elena moved through her cleaning routine while half listening to the evening's program. The gala featured several speakers discussing the importance of music education, followed by a silent auction and what was supposed to be a performance by the renowned pianist Jonathan Hartwell. Hartwell was a local celebrity who had achieved international recognition for his interpretations of Romantic-era composers. Elena had heard Hartwell perform several years earlier at a free community concert in the park. His technical skills were undeniable, and his stage presence commanded attention from audiences worldwide. She admired his success while simultaneously feeling a pang of regret for her own abandoned dreams. Hartwell represented everything she might have achieved if circumstances had been different. As Elena worked near the edge of the ballroom, she could see the beautiful Steinway grand piano positioned on the small stage at the front of the room. The instrument's polished black surface reflected the ballroom's lights like still water, and its presence seemed to fill the space with potential energy. Elena found herself imagining what it would feel like to sit at that bench, to feel those perfectly weighted keys respond to her touch. She shook herself from such impractical daydreams and returned to her work. The evening was progressing smoothly, with guests enjoying their 7-course dinner while discussing the auction items and upcoming performance. Elena noticed several familiar faces among the crowd: the mayor, 2 city council members, the president of the largest bank in the state, and numerous business leaders whose names regularly appeared in the society pages. These were people accustomed to the finest things in life, who traveled internationally for vacation and thought nothing of spending thousands of dollars on a single evening of entertainment. Elena didn't resent their wealth, but she sometimes wondered if they understood how different life looked from her perspective. Did they know that their housekeeper might be working 3 jobs to afford rent? Did they consider that their gardener might be supporting elderly parents in another country? Elena's philosophical musings were interrupted by a commotion near the stage. She looked up to see Jonathan Hartwell standing beside the piano, his face pale and his right hand cradled against his chest. The evening's host, a prominent socialite named Victoria Pemberton, was speaking with him in hushed, urgent tones. Even from across the room, Elena could see that something was seriously wrong. Mrs. Pemberton approached the microphone with obvious distress. Her usual composed demeanor had cracked, revealing the anxiety underneath. She tapped the microphone to get the audience's attention, and the conversational buzz gradually died down as guests turned their focus to the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Pemberton began, her voice trembling slightly, "I'm afraid I have some disappointing news. Mr. Hartwell has experienced a sudden injury to his hand and will not be able to perform this evening." A collective murmur of disappointment rippled through the audience. Elena watched as Hartwell was escorted from the stage by club staff, his famous hands now rendered useless by whatever injury had befallen him. Pemberton continued speaking, apologizing profusely and promising to try to find alternative entertainment, but Elena could hear the desperation in her voice. The evening's main attraction had just vanished, leaving behind a room full of disappointed donors and a fundraising goal that might not be met. The guests began to shift restlessly in their seats. Some reached for their phones, others engaged in animated conversations with their table companions. Elena could sense the energy in the room changing from anticipation to frustration. These people had paid premium prices for an exclusive musical experience, and they were not accustomed to being disappointed. Mrs. Pemberton was now conferring with other event organizers near the stage, their body language betraying their panic. Elena knew that charity fundraising events lived or died by their ability to create memorable experiences for wealthy donors. A failed gala could impact the organization's ability to raise money for years to come, ultimately affecting the children who depended on music education programs. As Elena continued her work, she found herself thinking about the silent Steinway piano. The instrument sat unused while hundreds of people yearned to hear music. She knew every detail of Jonathan Hartwell's planned repertoire. The program had listed Chopin's Ballade No. 1, Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, and Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, arranged for solo piano. These were pieces Elena knew intimately, compositions she had studied and performed during her college years. A dangerous thought began to form in Elena's mind. She pushed it away immediately, focusing instead on cleaning wine glasses and straightening chairs. The thought returned more insistently. She could save this evening. She possessed the skill and knowledge to perform the exact program that had been advertised. The piano was waiting, the audience was present, and the cause was worthy. But the practical obstacles seemed insurmountable. Elena was a cleaning lady wearing a uniform, not a concert pianist in an evening gown. These people didn't know her, didn't trust her, and had no reason to believe she could deliver the performance they expected. The risk of humiliation was enormous, and failure could cost her the job she desperately needed to support Sophia. Elena tried to focus on her work, but the music kept calling to her. She could hear the opening measures of the Chopin ballad in her mind, feel her fingers moving through the familiar passages. Her grandmother's voice seemed to whisper across the years, "La musica vive en tu corazón, Misha. No la deja morir." Mrs. Pemberton had returned to the microphone, her composure barely maintained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are making every effort to find alternative entertainment for this evening. We ask for your patience and understanding during this difficult situation." The audience's restlessness was becoming more pronounced. Elena noticed several guests glancing at their watches and exchanging looks that suggested they might leave early. The evening was teetering on the edge of complete failure, and with it the hopes of young musicians who would benefit from the fundraising proceeds. Elena made a decision that would change her life forever. She parked her cleaning cart in an inconspicuous corner and walked purposefully toward the stage. Her heart pounded with each step, but her resolve grew stronger. She thought about Sophia sleeping peacefully at home, about her grandmother's unwavering belief in the power of music, and about the children who needed advocates for arts education. Mrs. Pemberton was still speaking when Elena approached the edge of the stage. The event coordinator looked down with surprise and mild annoyance at being interrupted by a member of the cleaning staff. Elena cleared her throat and spoke just loudly enough to be heard over the microphone. "Excuse me, ma'am. I believe I can help with your situation." Mrs. Pemberton stared at Elena as if she had spoken in a foreign language. The murmur of conversation in the ballroom continued, but a few nearby guests had noticed the interaction and were watching with curiosity. "I'm sorry, but this really isn't the time," Mrs. Pemberton replied, her voice strained with stress. "We're dealing with a very serious problem here." Elena took a deep breath and found her voice. "I know, that's why I'm offering to help. I can perform the program that Mr. Hartwell was supposed to play tonight." The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything both women understood about social hierarchies and appropriate behavior. Mrs. Pemberton's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching disbelief. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Elena's voice grew stronger with conviction. "I said I can perform tonight's program. I'm classically trained, and I know all the pieces that were listed. I can save your event." Mrs. Pemberton looked at Elena's uniform, then at the waiting piano, then back at Elena's determined face. The weight of the evening's success or failure pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. She was a woman accustomed to managing every detail of high society events, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for this moment. The conversation had attracted the attention of more guests, who turned in their chairs to see what was happening. Elena could feel their curious stares, could sense their skepticism and amusement at the sight of a cleaning lady making such an outrageous claim. "You're serious about this?" Mrs. Pemberton asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elena nodded firmly. "Completely serious. Give me 5 minutes at that piano, and I'll prove it to you." Mrs. Pemberton glanced around the ballroom, calculating risks and alternatives in her mind. The evening was already a disaster. Perhaps it couldn't get much worse. And if this young woman was telling the truth, if she really could perform at a professional level, then perhaps the gala could still be saved. "What's your name?" Mrs. Pemberton asked. "Elena Vasquez." Mrs. Pemberton closed her eyes for a moment, as if praying for guidance or courage. When she opened them, she had made her decision. "Miss Vasquez, if you embarrass me or this organization, there will be consequences. Do you understand?" Elena met her gaze steadily. "I understand, but I won't embarrass anyone. I'll make beautiful music." Mrs. Pemberton stepped aside, gesturing toward the piano with a mixture of resignation and desperate hope. "Then show us what you can do." Elena walked onto the stage, her cleaning uniform a stark contrast to the elegant surroundings. The ballroom fell silent as guests realized something unprecedented was about to happen. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, wine glasses were set down, and all attention focused on the young woman approaching the Steinway Grand. Elena sat at the piano bench and adjusted her position, her hands hovering over the keys without touching them. She could feel the weight of hundreds of stares, could sense the mixture of curiosity, skepticism and anticipation that filled the room. This was the moment she had dreamed of since childhood, but it had arrived in the most unexpected circumstances possible. She closed her eyes briefly, hearing her grandmother's voice one more time, "Music lives in your heart, my daughter. Don't let it die." When Elena opened her eyes and placed her fingers on the keys, she was no longer a cleaning lady or a single mother struggling to make ends meet. She was a musician, ready to share her gift with the world, regardless of the consequences. The first note that emerged from the Steinway was perfect, clear and filled with emotion. Elena had begun her performance, and nothing in her life would ever be the same again. The first chord that flowed from the Steinway filled the grand ballroom with crystalline perfection. Elena's fingers found their home on the ivory keys as if they had been crafted specifically for her touch. She began with Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor, a piece that had challenged and inspired her since her university days. The opening melody emerged with delicate precision, each note carefully shaped and weighted to create the composer's intended emotional landscape. The audience sat frozen in their chairs, caught between disbelief and growing fascination. They had expected disaster when this uniformed cleaning woman approached the concert grand, but the sounds emerging from the piano were undeniably professional. Elena's technique was flawless, her musical interpretation sophisticated and deeply personal. She played with the kind of emotional honesty that separates true artists from mere technicians. Mrs. Pemberton stood at the side of the stage, her hand pressed to her chest as she watched the impossible unfold before her eyes. She had gambled the reputation of the entire gala on the word of a woman she knew nothing about, and somehow that gamble was paying off in the most spectacular way possible. The music filling the ballroom was not just competent, it was extraordinary. Elena lost herself completely in the Chopin, her consciousness merging with the composer's intentions from nearly 2 centuries earlier. Her fingers navigated the complex passages with muscle memory built through thousands of hours of practice. The dramatic shifts between gentle introspection and passionate intensity flowed naturally from her hands, as if the piano was simply an extension of her emotional state, rather than a separate instrument requiring technical manipulation. A distinguished gentleman in the front row leaned forward, his wineglass forgotten as he absorbed every nuance of Elena's performance. Dr. Robert Sterling was himself a trained musician, having studied composition at Juilliard before pursuing a career in medicine. He recognized immediately that he was witnessing something remarkable, a level of artistry that belonged in the world's finest concert halls, rather than as emergency entertainment at a charity fundraiser. The mayor's wife, Catherine Morrison, felt tears welling in her eyes as Elena's interpretation of the Chopin reached its emotional climax. She had attended hundreds of cultural events over her decades of public service, had heard internationally renowned artists perform in venues across 3 continents, but something about this unexpected performance touched her more deeply than any previous musical experience. Perhaps it was the courage required to step forward in such circumstances, or perhaps it was the raw authenticity of Elena's playing, but she found herself moved in ways she hadn't anticipated. As the ballad progressed through its complex narrative structure, Elena's confidence grew exponentially. The initial nervousness that had accompanied her walk to the piano vanished completely, replaced by the focused intensity she remembered from her college performances. This was who she truly was beneath the uniforms and service jobs, beneath the struggles and compromises that had defined her adult life. This was Elena the artist, finally given permission to exist in the world again. The technical demands of the piece increased as it moved toward its conclusion, requiring rapid-scale passages and dramatic dynamic contrasts that would challenge even seasoned professionals. Elena navigated these difficulties with graceful ease, her hands dancing across the keys with balletic precision. She had maintained her skills through years of solitary practice, but performing for an audience awakened something deeper, a level of musical communication that could only emerge through the shared experience of live performance. When the final notes of the ballad faded into silence, the audience remained completely still for several heartbeats. The transition from sound to silence was so abrupt that it seemed to create a vacuum in the room, a space where normal conversation felt impossible. Elena kept her hands on the keys for a moment longer, reluctant to break the spell that had connected her to the music and to the listening crowd. Then the applause began, tentative at first but quickly building to genuine enthusiasm. These were people accustomed to polite appreciation for cultural events, but Elena's performance had evoked something more authentic. The clapping was accompanied by expressions of amazement, whispered conversations of disbelief, and the kind of energized attention that indicated a truly memorable experience. Without pause, Elena transitioned into Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. Sub. 2, a piece that showcased entirely different aspects of her musical personality. Where the Chopin had been introspective and emotionally complex, the Liszt was virtuosic and dramatic, demanding technical fireworks and theatrical flair. Elena attacked the opening with bold confidence, her hands flying across the keyboard in passages that had intimidated piano students for generations. The Hungarian Rhapsody told the story of Elena's musical education in ways the audience couldn't possibly understand. Her grandmother Isabella had introduced her to this piece during her teenage years, explaining how Liszt had captured the spirit of Hungarian folk music while elevating it to concert hall sophistication. Isabella had been particularly drawn to composers who honored their cultural heritage while achieving international recognition, seeing in their success a reflection of her own immigrant experience. Elena played the famous opening cadenza with spectacular flair, her fingers executing the rapid-fire passages with mechanical precision while maintaining the musical phrasing that gave meaning to the technical display. This was showmanship of the highest order, the kind of playing that made audiences gasp and lean forward in their seats. Several guests had pulled out their phones to record, though the ballroom's acoustics made clear that no recording could capture the full impact of live performance. A young violinist named Marcus Chen sat at one of the back tables, his professional training allowing him to appreciate nuances that escaped casual listeners. He was the concertmaster of the city's symphony orchestra and had performed this same Liszt Rhapsody as part of a piano-violin arrangement just months earlier. Elena's interpretation was revelatory, bringing out colors and phrasings in the music that he had never noticed despite his intimate familiarity with the score. The technical demands of the Rhapsody continued to escalate as Elena moved through its various sections, each presenting different challenges and opportunities for musical expression. She played the tender middle section with exquisite sensitivity, drawing sounds from the piano that seemed to caress the air itself. When the piece returned to its virtuosic outer sections, she unleashed waves of sound that filled every corner of the vast ballroom without ever becoming harsh or overwhelming. Elena's grandmother had always emphasized that true virtuosity was not about showing off but about serving the music. Isabella had taught her that technical skill was merely a tool for emotional communication, that the most dazzling passages were meaningless unless they contributed to the overall artistic statement. Elena's performance embodied this philosophy completely, her spectacular technique serving deeper musical purposes rather than existing for its own sake. The audience was now fully invested in Elena's performance, their initial skepticism replaced by genuine admiration and excitement. They were witnessing something unprecedented, a Cinderella story unfolding in real time with themselves as primary witnesses. The social media posts were already beginning, though none of the hastily typed descriptions could adequately capture the surreal nature of the evening's transformation. Mrs. Pemberton had abandoned any pretense of managing other aspects of the event, standing transfixed as Elena brought the Hungarian Rhapsody to its thunderous conclusion. The final passages required octave jumps and chord progressions that pushed the boundaries of what seemed humanly possible, yet Elena executed them with apparent ease while maintaining the musical integrity that separated artistry from mere athleticism. The applause that followed the list was significantly louder and more sustained than the response to the Chopin. Several guests were now standing, their enthusiasm overcome by the sheer audacity and skill of what they had witnessed. Elena acknowledged the appreciation with a modest nod, her focus already shifting to the final piece in the planned program. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, arranged for solo piano, represented the evening's ultimate challenge. Originally composed for piano and full orchestra, the piece had been transcribed to allow the solo instrument to carry both the melodic and harmonic responsibilities normally shared between soloist and ensemble. Elena had studied this arrangement during her college years, drawn to its combination of technical difficulty and emotional depth. She began the Rachmaninoff with the brooding opening theme that had made the concerto one of the most beloved works in the classical repertoire. Her left hand provided the orchestral foundation while her right hand sang the magnificent melody that had soundtracked countless films and inspired generations of musicians. The piano seemed to expand beyond its physical limitations, Elena's interpretation suggesting the presence of invisible strings and woodwinds and brass. Dr. Sterling, the physician with Juilliard training, recognized immediately that Elena was performing from memory without sheet music. The Rachmaninoff concerto was nearly 40 minutes of continuous music in its full orchestral version, and even the solo piano arrangement represented an enormous memorization challenge. Elena's ability to perform such repertoire without scores indicated not just exceptional musical memory, but deep internalization of the composer's structural and harmonic language. The first movement of the concerto unfolded with cinematic scope and emotional power. Elena's hands seemed to possess independent consciousness, her left creating rich harmonic foundations while her right soared through Rachmaninoff's inspired melodies. The piano became an entire symphony orchestra under her direction, each voice clearly delineated despite being produced by a single instrument and single performer. A prominent arts patron named Elizabeth Hartwell, widow of the injured pianist Jonathan Hartwell, sat in stunned recognition of Elena's abilities. She had lived her entire adult life surrounded by professional musicians, had hosted countless recitals and master classes in her own home, had developed sophisticated appreciation for the subtleties that distinguished good playing from greatness. Elena's performance exhibited all the qualities that Elizabeth associated with world-class artistry: flawless technique, deep musical understanding, and the rare ability to communicate emotion through abstract sound. The second movement of the Rachmaninoff provided Elena with opportunities to demonstrate her gifts for lyrical expression. The famous melody that emerged from her hands was shaped with such exquisite sensitivity that several audience members found themselves emotionally overwhelmed. Elena played as if she were confessing her deepest secrets through Rachmaninoff's notes, her personal struggles and triumphs somehow woven into the composer's century-old musical narrative. Sofia's father had once criticized Elena for spending too much time at the piano, claiming that music was an impractical hobby that distracted from more important responsibilities. Tonight, as Elena poured her heart into Rachmaninoff's sublime slow movement, she understood more clearly than ever why he had been so wrong. Music wasn't an escape from life, it was the deepest expression of what life meant, the most honest language for feelings that had no words. The technical challenges of the concerto continued to mount as Elena progressed through its 3 movements, but she met each demand with increasing confidence and authority. Her years of solitary practice had maintained her skills at the highest level, and performing for an audience had awakened interpretive insights that could only emerge through live musical communication. She was playing better than she had ever played before, reaching depths of expression she hadn't known she possessed. A young music student named David Park sat mesmerized by Elena's performance, his own aspirations suddenly seeming both more achievable and more daunting. He was a senior at the local music college, preparing for graduate auditions and hoping for a career as a performer. Elena's unexpected excellence reminded him why he had chosen music in the first place, while simultaneously raising questions about his own level of commitment and preparation. The third movement of the Rachmaninoff built to its famous climactic passages, demanding everything Elena had to give in terms of both technical execution and emotional investment. Her hands flew across the keys in passages that seemed to blur the boundaries between human capability and musical necessity. The piano sang and thundered and whispered under her touch, becoming a vehicle for communication that transcended the normal limitations of language and social convention. Elena thought about Sofia as she played, imagining her daughter's reaction to seeing her mother in these circumstances. Sofia had always known that Elena could play piano, but she had never witnessed her mother performing for an audience, had never understood that Elena's musical abilities extended far beyond the bedtime lullabies and simple songs that filled their apartment in the evenings. Tonight would change how Sofia understood her mother's identity, adding new dimensions to Elena's role as parent and provider. The final pages of the Rachmaninoff required sustained fortissimo playing that would have challenged even the most physically robust pianists. Elena summoned reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed, her entire body engaged in the effort to produce the massive sounds required by the composer's vision. The piano seemed to grow larger under her hands, its voice expanding to fill not just the ballroom but the entire evening, with music of overwhelming power and beauty. As Elena approached the concerto's conclusion, she was aware that her life was changing with each passing measure. The woman who had walked onto this stage in a cleaning uniform would not be the same person who walked off. The music had transformed her, had reminded her of who she truly was beneath the compromises and accommodations of adult survival. She was Elena Vasquez, the artist, the inheritor of her grandmother's musical legacy, the keeper of dreams that had seemed lost forever. The final chord of the Rachmaninoff rang through the ballroom with ceremonial finality, marking the end not just of the performance, but of Elena's invisibility. She sat at the piano bench for several seconds after the sound faded, her hands still on the keys, reluctant to acknowledge that her moment in the spotlight had ended. The silence that followed was profound, charged with the recognition that everyone present had witnessed something extraordinary. Then the applause began, but this was unlike the polite appreciation that had followed the earlier pieces. This was thunderous, sustained and deeply felt appreciation for artistry of the highest caliber. Every person in the ballroom was standing, their hands coming together with genuine enthusiasm and amazement. Several people were openly weeping, moved by the combination of musical excellence and the remarkable circumstances that had made it possible. Mrs. Pemberton approached the piano with tears streaming down her cheeks, her earlier panic replaced by overwhelming gratitude and amazement. She had taken an enormous professional risk by allowing Elena to perform, but that risk had resulted in the most successful charity event in the organization's history. The evening that had seemed destined for disaster had been transformed into something magical and unforgettable. Elena stood and faced the audience, still hardly believing that she had actually performed Chopin, Liszt and Rachmaninoff for hundreds of people in formal evening wear. The ovation continued for several minutes, showing no signs of diminishing. People were not just clapping, they were cheering, calling out words of appreciation and capturing the moment with their phones and cameras. Dr. Sterling pushed through the crowd to reach the stage, his medical training forgotten in the face of Elena's musical revelation. He had questions about her background, her training, her availability for future performances. Behind him came Elizabeth Hartwell, equally eager to discuss possibilities for Elena's career development. The arts patron had connections throughout the classical music world and was already mentally composing emails to conductors and managers who needed to hear about this discovery. A representative from the local symphony orchestra was taking notes in his program, while a music critic from the city newspaper was frantically typing on his phone, trying to capture the essence of what he had witnessed for tomorrow's edition. Several wealthy patrons were discussing among themselves how they might support Elena's return to professional music, while others debated the best conservatories for someone seeking to resume interrupted studies. The evening had been transformed from a potentially disastrous charity fundraiser into something approaching a revival meeting, with Elena's music serving as the catalyst for a collective awakening to the power of artistic excellence. People who had arrived thinking about business deals and social obligations were now discussing music education, artistic development, and the importance of recognizing hidden talent regardless of its packaging. Elena accepted the acclaim with gracious humility, her years of service work having taught her to remain composed under attention, while her musical training provided experience in acknowledging audience appreciation. She was simultaneously overwhelmed by the response and deeply satisfied by the knowledge that she had shared her gift successfully, that her grandmother's musical legacy lived on through her performance. Mrs. Pemberton finally managed to restore some order to the proceedings, though the excited energy in the room remained palpable. She approached the microphone with Elena at her side, preparing to formally acknowledge what everyone had witnessed while trying to find words adequate to the occasion. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice still shaking with emotion, "I think we can all agree that this evening has exceeded our wildest expectations. Miss Elena Vasquez has reminded us why music education matters, why supporting young artists is essential, and why we must never assume we know the limits of human potential based on appearances alone." The applause that greeted these words was thunderous, and Elena felt herself becoming emotional as she realized that her performance had accomplished something beyond personal satisfaction. She had helped save the fundraising event, had contributed to the cause of music education, and had demonstrated that artistic excellence could emerge from the most unexpected circumstances. As the formal program concluded and guests began to circulate through the ballroom, Elena found herself surrounded by people eager to speak with her, to learn more about her background and her future plans. The conversations that followed would prove to be as life-changing as the performance itself, opening doors to opportunities she had never dared to imagine. The single mother who had entered the evening as an invisible service worker was leaving as a recognized artist, her talent acknowledged by people with the power to change her professional trajectory. The transformation was so complete and so sudden that Elena struggled to process its implications, but she knew with absolute certainty that her life had been permanently altered by her decision to step forward and share her gift. The cleaning cart sat forgotten in its corner, no longer relevant to Elena's identity or her immediate future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new possibilities, but tonight had proven that dreams deferred were not necessarily dreams destroyed, and that courage combined with preparation could create miracles even in the most unlikely circumstances. As Elena continued to receive congratulations and expressions of support from the assembled guests, she thought about Sophia sleeping peacefully at home, unaware that her mother's single act of courage had just rewritten both of their futures. The little girl who had fallen asleep to gentle lullabies would wake up to discover that her mother was no longer just Elena the provider, but Elena the artist, ready to reclaim her place in the world of music she had never truly left behind. The crowd gradually began to disperse as Elena found herself in the center of an impromptu receiving line. Distinguished guests approached her one by one, each offering congratulations and expressing amazement at what they had witnessed. Dr. Sterling was among the first to reach her, his handshake firm and his eyes bright with professional curiosity. "Miss Vasquez, that was absolutely extraordinary," he said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine musical authority. "I studied piano for 15 years before pursuing medicine, and I can honestly say, I've rarely heard playing of that caliber outside major concert halls. Where did you train?" Elena felt a flush of warmth at the recognition from someone who clearly understood what he had heard. "I studied at State University for 2 years before family circumstances required me to leave. Most of my training came from my grandmother, who was classically educated in Venezuela." Dr. Sterling nodded thoughtfully. 2 years of formal study couldn't possibly account for what we just heard. You must have incredible natural ability combined with extraordinary discipline. Have you continued performing since leaving university? Not publicly, Elena admitted. I practice at home most evenings, but tonight was my first performance for an audience in over 6 years. The doctor's eyebrows rose in astonishment. That makes tonight even more remarkable. Most professional pianists would struggle to maintain that level of technical precision and musical sensitivity without regular performance opportunities. Behind Dr. Sterling, Elena noticed an elegantly dressed woman with silver hair waiting patiently for her turn to speak. When the doctor stepped aside, the woman approached with a warm smile and extended her hand. "Miss Vasquez, I'm Elizabeth Hartwell. My late husband was a pianist, and I've spent most of my adult life supporting classical music in our community. What you did tonight was nothing short of miraculous." Her voice carried the refined accent of someone educated at prestigious institutions. "I'd very much like to discuss some opportunities that might interest you." Elena shook her hand, noting the understated elegance of Mrs. Hartwell's jewelry and the confident bearing that suggested both wealth and cultural sophistication. "Thank you so much for saying that. I'm still having difficulty believing this evening actually happened." Mrs. Hartwell laughed gently. "Oh, it happened, and tomorrow morning you're going to discover that word travels very quickly in classical music circles. I've already sent messages to 3 different artists' managers and 2 conservatory directors. By noon tomorrow, you'll likely have more performance opportunities than you can manage." The implications of Mrs. Hartwell's words began to sink in as Elena realized that her impromptu performance had been witnessed by people with significant connections throughout the music world. Her decision to step forward had been motivated by a desire to help save the evening's fundraiser, but the consequences were extending far beyond anything she had imagined. Marcus Chen, the young violinist from the symphony orchestra, waited his turn to speak with Elena. When Mrs. Hartwell moved aside, he approached with the enthusiasm of a colleague rather than the deference typically shown to social superiors. "I'm Marcus Chen from the City Symphony," he said, offering his business card. "Our music director is always looking for exceptional soloists, and after hearing you tonight, I'm certain he'd be interested in discussing collaboration opportunities. Would you be available for an audition sometime in the next few weeks?" Elena accepted the card with hands that were still slightly trembling from adrenaline and disbelief. "An audition with the symphony? Yes, I think I could arrange that. Though I should mention that I work 2 jobs currently, so my schedule is somewhat complicated." Marcus smiled knowingly. Most musicians have complicated schedules, especially those who are transitioning between different phases of their careers. "Don't worry about logistics right now. Focus on the fact that you've just demonstrated abilities that belong on the world's finest stages." As Elena continued receiving congratulations and business cards, she became aware that Mrs. Pemberton was approaching with a small group of people who had the purposeful bearing of event organizers and charity administrators. The lead coordinator's face showed a mixture of gratitude and amazement that had replaced her earlier panic completely. "Elena, I'd like you to meet some people who are very eager to speak with you," Mrs. Pemberton said, her voice still carrying traces of the evening's emotional intensity. "This is Caroline Fletcher, the executive director of the Youth Orchestra Foundation, and Thomas Brennan, who chairs our board of trustees." Caroline Fletcher was a woman in her 50s with the practical demeanor of someone accustomed to managing both artistic temperaments and financial realities. She shook Elena's hand with genuine warmth while studying her face as if memorizing it for future reference. "Miss Vasquez, what you've done tonight has exceeded our most optimistic expectations for this fundraiser," she said. "Your performance has inspired our guests to contribute almost 3 times our original goal. More importantly, you've reminded everyone present why music education matters so profoundly." Thomas Brennan nodded in agreement, his businessman's bearing softened by obvious emotional impact from the evening's events. "We'd like to discuss the possibility of your becoming a spokesperson for our organization, perhaps performing at future fundraising events. Your story embodies everything we're trying to achieve with our educational programs." Elena felt overwhelmed by the rapid succession of opportunities being presented to her. Each conversation opened new possibilities for her musical career, while simultaneously raising questions about how such changes would affect her responsibilities as Sophia's mother and primary provider. "I'm honored by your interest," she said carefully, "but I need to consider how any commitments would work with my daughter's needs. She's 6 years old, and her well-being has to be my first priority." Caroline Fletcher's expression softened with understanding. "Of course, and that's exactly the kind of perspective that makes you perfect for representing our cause. Music education should support families, not separate them. We'd work around your schedule and make sure Sophia could attend events whenever possible." The conversation was interrupted by the approach of a young woman with a press badge and a digital recorder. Elena recognized her as someone who had been taking notes throughout the evening's performances and speeches. "Miss Vasquez, I'm Jennifer Walsh from the Morning Herald. Would you be willing to answer a few questions for tomorrow's art section? I think our readers would be fascinated by your story." Elena glanced at Mrs. Pemberton, who nodded encouragingly. The publicity would likely benefit both Elena's emerging career and the organization's ongoing fundraising efforts. "I suppose that would be fine," Elena said, though the prospect of newspaper coverage added another surreal element to an already unbelievable evening. Jennifer Walsh activated her recorder and consulted her notes. "Let's start with basics. How long have you been working at the Belmont Country Club, and did anyone there know about your musical background?" "I've been here for 3 years," Elena replied. "Music has always been a private part of my life, something I did at home after work and on weekends. I never imagined that my job and my musical interests would intersect like this." The reporter nodded and continued, "What was going through your mind when you decided to volunteer tonight?" "That must have taken enormous courage. Elena paused, considering how to explain the complex emotions and motivations that had driven her decision. I heard the music in my head, and I knew the evening was important for children who needed access to music education. When I saw that beautiful piano sitting silent, I couldn't bear the thought of all those people leaving disappointed when I knew I could provide what they came to hear. And your daughter, how do you think she'll react when she learns what happened tonight? Elena smiled, thinking about Sophia's likely amazement and pride. Sophia has always known I play piano, but she's never seen me perform for anyone except her. Tomorrow morning is going to be quite a revelation for both of us. As the brief interview concluded, Elena noticed that most of the guests had departed, leaving behind a small group of people who seemed reluctant to end their connection to the evening's extraordinary events. Mrs. Pemberton approached with a warm smile and an envelope in her hand. "Elena, before you leave, I want you to have this," she said, offering the envelope. "It's a small token of appreciation from the organization, but more importantly, it's a formal invitation to perform at our spring fundraiser in May. We'd love to feature you as our headline performer." Elena opened the envelope to find a check that represented more money than she typically earned in 2 months, along with an elegant invitation printed on heavy cardstock. The financial relief was immediate and profound, but the invitation represented something even more valuable: recognition of her identity as a professional musician. "I don't know what to say," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. "This evening has changed my life in ways I'm still trying to understand." Pemberton placed a gentle hand on Elena's shoulder. "You changed all of our lives tonight. You reminded us that extraordinary talent can emerge from the most unexpected places, and that supporting arts education isn't just about helping other people's children. It's about recognizing that the next great artist might be working right beside us, waiting for someone to notice and provide an opportunity." As Elena prepared to leave the ballroom, she took one last look at the Steinway grand piano that had been the vehicle for her transformation. The instrument sat silent now, its polished surface reflecting the dimmed lights of the nearly empty room. Tomorrow, Elena would return to her small apartment and her regular responsibilities, but she would be returning as a different person entirely. The drive home passed in a dreamlike haze as Elena processed the evening's events. She had awakened that morning as a single mother, working 2 jobs to make ends meet, invisible to the wealthy people whose lives she helped maintain through her labor. She was returning home as a recognized artist with opportunities she couldn't have imagined, her talent acknowledged by people with the power to change her professional trajectory permanently. Sophia was sleeping peacefully when Elena arrived home, her small form curled under blankets decorated with drawings of musical notes that Elena had helped her create months earlier. Elena sat beside her daughter's bed for several minutes, studying the innocent face and contemplating how their lives might change in the coming weeks and months. The apartment looked exactly as she had left it that morning, but Elena's perspective had shifted so dramatically that familiar objects seemed different. Her grandmother's piano, which had been a source of private comfort and connection to family heritage, now appeared as a professional instrument worthy of public performance. The small living room that had served as Elena's practice space now seemed like the studio of a working musician rather than simply part of a modest home. Elena changed out of her work uniform and sat at the piano, her fingers finding the keys with the same natural ease that had served her so well earlier in the evening. She played softly, not wanting to wake Sophia, but needing to confirm that her abilities were real rather than some elaborate fantasy conjured by stress and wishful thinking. The music that emerged from her grandmother's piano was every bit as beautiful and technically accomplished as what she had produced on the Steinway Grand. Elena's talent was authentic and substantial, capable of sustaining the kind of career she had abandoned years earlier when family circumstances forced different choices. As she played, Elena thought about her grandmother's words: "La musica vive en tu corazón mia, no la dejes morir." Tonight had proven that music truly did live in her heart, and that it was strong enough to survive years of suppression and neglect. The dream had waited patiently for its moment to emerge, and when that moment arrived, Elena had found the courage to honor both her talent and her grandmother's legacy. The following morning brought a flood of phone calls and emails that confirmed Mrs. Hartwell's prediction about news traveling quickly through classical music circles. Elena's phone rang continuously with offers from concert presenters, recording companies and arts organizations throughout the region. Local television stations requested interviews, and several music schools inquired about master class appearances. Sophia's reaction to the morning's chaos was a mixture of confusion and excitement as she watched her mother field calls from people discussing performance schedules and recording contracts. Elena tried to explain the previous evening's events in terms a 6-year-old could understand, emphasizing that Mommy had played piano for many people who enjoyed the music very much. "Does this mean you won't have to clean anymore?" Sophia asked with the practical directness of childhood. Elena hugged her daughter close, still uncertain about how dramatically their lives would change. "It means we have some new opportunities to explore, sweetheart. But no matter what happens, my most important job will always be being your mommy." Over the following weeks, Elena's transformation from cleaning lady to recognized pianist continued to unfold with bewildering speed. Her debut performance with the City Symphony Orchestra drew standing ovations and critical acclaim, leading to additional bookings throughout the region. A recording contract materialized with a label specializing in classical music, offering Elena the opportunity to share her interpretations of favorite repertoire with audiences far beyond her immediate geographic area. The financial changes were immediate and substantial. Elena was able to reduce her hours at both the country club and the music store, dedicating more time to practice and performance while maintaining the stability Sophia needed. They moved to a larger apartment with a dedicated music room where Elena could practice without disturbing neighbors, and where Sophia could explore her own growing interest in piano lessons. Most importantly, Elena's relationship with her own identity underwent fundamental reconstruction. She was no longer a former music student who had been forced to abandon her dreams, but a working professional musician who happened to have taken an unusual path to career establishment. Her experience as a service worker had given her perspectives on life and art that informed her musical interpretations with unusual depth and authenticity. The spring fundraiser that featured Elena as headline performer raised more money than any previous event in the organization's history. Her personal story resonated with audiences who saw in her journey a reflection of their own hidden talents and deferred dreams. Elena's success became a symbol of possibility, proof that extraordinary achievements could emerge from ordinary circumstances when talent met opportunity and courage. Standing ovations became routine aspects of Elena's performances as audiences responded to both her musical excellence and the inspiring circumstances of her artistic emergence. Critics praised her interpretations for their emotional honesty and technical precision, noting that her playing possessed a maturity and depth that suggested far more experience than her resume indicated. Elena's relationship with Sophia deepened as they shared the excitement of her mother's developing career. The little girl attended many performances, sitting in front rows reserved for family members and beaming with pride as audiences celebrated her mother's artistry. Sophia's own piano lessons flourished under Elena's direct instruction, supplemented by formal teachers who recognized exceptional talent in both mother and daughter. The apartment that had once felt cramped and limiting now served as headquarters for Elena's multifaceted career as performer, recording artist and advocate for music education. Interview requests arrived regularly from journalists interested in her unique story, while performance opportunities expanded to include major venues throughout the country. Elena never forgot the evening at the Belmont Country Club that had changed everything, or the courage required to step forward when opportunity presented itself. She spoke frequently about the importance of recognizing hidden talent and providing platforms for artistic expression, regardless of someone's current circumstances or professional background. Her success story became a frequently cited example in discussions about arts education funding and the value of supporting community music programs. Elena's transformation from invisible service worker to celebrated artist demonstrated that talent could flourish in unexpected places, waiting only for recognition and opportunity to achieve its full potential. Years later, Elena would look back on that pivotal evening as the moment when her real life began, when she finally found the courage to claim her identity as the artist she had always been beneath the uniforms and compromises of economic necessity. Her grandmother's music had indeed lived in her heart, waiting patiently for its moment to shine before the world and inspire others to recognize the extraordinary possibilities that existed within seemingly ordinary lives. The months following Elena's breakthrough performance at the Belmont Country Club brought changes that neither she nor Sophia could have anticipated. What had begun as a single evening of extraordinary courage evolved into a complete reconstruction of their daily existence, with opportunities arriving faster than Elena could properly evaluate them. The recording contract with Meridian Classical Records proved to be both a blessing and a challenge. Elena found herself spending long hours in professional studios, working with sound engineers and producers who understood the technical aspects of music production, but sometimes struggled to appreciate the emotional authenticity that made her performances so compelling. The recording process required multiple takes of each piece, demanding a level of consistency and precision that differed significantly from live performance. Elena's first album, titled Awakening, featured the same repertoire she had performed that fateful night at the country club, along with additional works by Chopin, Debussy, and several pieces composed by her grandmother during her years in Venezuela. The inclusion of Isabella's compositions was Elena's way of honoring the musical heritage that had shaped her artistic identity, while also introducing audiences to music they had never heard before. The album's release coincided with Elena's debut at Carnegie Hall, a milestone that represented the pinnacle of classical music achievement. Standing backstage in the legendary venue, Elena felt the weight of musical history surrounding her. She thought about the countless artists who had walked these same corridors, from Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff to more contemporary masters who had shaped the classical music world. Sophia accompanied her mother to New York for the Carnegie Hall performance, her eyes wide with amazement as they explored the city together. For the 6-year-old, the towering buildings and constant activity were fascinating, but she was most impressed by the reverent way people spoke about her mother's upcoming performance. Sophia was beginning to understand that her mother possessed abilities that extended far beyond their apartment and their previous life. The Carnegie Hall concert sold out within hours of tickets becoming available, with classical music enthusiasts traveling from across the country to hear the woman whose story had captured international attention. Music critics from major publications had flown in specifically to review Elena's performance, while recording industry executives evaluated her potential for long-term commercial success. Elena's preparation for Carnegie Hall required her to confront aspects of professional music making that she had never previously encountered. Stage lighting required specific positioning and movement patterns that felt artificial compared to her instinctive approach to performance. The acoustic properties of the hall demanded adjustments to her playing technique, while the formal concert dress and elaborate stage setup created distance between performer and audience that differed dramatically from her intimate debut. Despite these challenges, Elena's Carnegie Hall performance exceeded even the most optimistic expectations. Her interpretation of Chopin's Piano Sonata No. 2 revealed new depths in familiar music, while her grandmother's compositions introduced American audiences to Venezuelan musical traditions they had never encountered. The standing ovation lasted 12 minutes, with critics later describing the evening as a defining moment in contemporary classical music. The success of Elena's Carnegie Hall debut led to immediate bookings at major venues throughout North America and Europe. Symphony orchestras competed for her availability, while chamber music festivals sought her participation in collaborative programs. Elena found herself navigating a complex world of artistic management, international travel, and media obligations that required skills entirely different from those needed for musical performance. Managing these new responsibilities while maintaining her role as Sophia's primary caregiver required careful planning and frequent compromise. Elena hired a nanny who could travel with them when concert tours demanded extended absences from home, but she insisted on maintaining as much normalcy as possible in Sophia's daily routine. School attendance took priority over performance opportunities, and Elena frequently turned down lucrative engagements that would have required Sophia to miss too many classes. Sophia's own relationship with music deepened as she witnessed her mother's career development. The little girl began taking formal piano lessons with one of Elena's colleagues from the music store, showing natural aptitude that reminded everyone of her mother's early development. Elena was careful not to pressure Sophia toward musical achievement, but she encouraged her daughter's interest while emphasizing that music should bring joy rather than stress. The financial transformation accompanying Elena's career success allowed them to purchase a house in a neighborhood with excellent schools and safe streets for Sophia to explore. The new home featured a dedicated music room with professional quality instruments and acoustic treatment that allowed Elena to practice without disturbing neighbors. Sophia claimed a corner of the music room for her own small piano, creating a space where mother and daughter could make music together. Elena's advocacy work for music education expanded as her public profile grew. She testified before congressional committees about the importance of arts funding, while her personal story became a powerful argument for maintaining music programs in schools facing budget constraints. Elena spoke frequently about her grandmother's influence and the role that early musical exposure had played in shaping her artistic development. The Youth Orchestra Foundation that had originally hosted Elena's breakthrough performance became a primary beneficiary of her advocacy efforts. Her continued involvement with their fundraising events helped establish an endowment fund that would support music education programs for generations of students. Elena insisted that scholarships be available regardless of students' family income or background, ensuring that talented young musicians would not face the same financial barriers that had interrupted her own education. Elena's relationship with the classical music establishment evolved as she gained experience and confidence as a professional performer. Early in her career, she had felt intimidated by the formal protocols and social hierarchies that governed concert hall culture. Over time, she learned to navigate these systems while maintaining the authenticity and emotional honesty that made her performances distinctive. Her unique background as a former service worker provided Elena with perspectives on class and social mobility that differed significantly from those of musicians who had followed traditional paths through conservatory training and family support. Elena spoke openly about the challenges of transitioning between social worlds, and her comments resonated with audiences who had experienced similar struggles in their own professional development. The success of Elena's first album led to additional recording projects that explored different aspects of her musical personality. Her second album featured collaborations with jazz musicians, demonstrating her ability to work effectively across stylistic boundaries. The third recording focused entirely on Latin American composers, including several pieces by her grandmother, alongside works by Villa-Lobos, Ginastera, and other masters of the classical tradition. Each recording project required Elena to expand her repertoire and develop new technical skills. Working with jazz artists taught her about improvisation and rhythmic flexibility, while the Latin American project deepened her connection to cultural traditions that had been part of her family heritage, but which she had never fully explored. These musical adventures kept Elena's artistry fresh and prevented her from becoming trapped in the limited repertoire that had launched her career. Sophia's development during these transformative years reflected the stability and opportunities that Elena's success had provided. The little girl thrived in her new school, making friends easily and demonstrating academic abilities that suggested she had inherited her mother's intellectual gifts along with musical talent. Sophia's teachers frequently commented on her maturity and empathy, qualities that Elena attributed to their shared experiences navigating significant life changes. Elena's touring schedule required careful coordination with Sophia's school calendar and extracurricular activities. Summer tours allowed Sophia to travel with her mother, exposing the young girl to different cultures and musical traditions around the world. These experiences broadened Sophia's worldview while strengthening the bond between mother and daughter through shared adventures and discoveries. The international recognition of Elena's artistry brought opportunities to perform with the world's most prestigious orchestras and conductors. Her interpretation of Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 23 with the Berlin Philharmonic received critical acclaim throughout Europe, while her performance of Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue with the New York Philharmonic demonstrated her versatility across musical styles. These high-profile collaborations established Elena as a major figure in contemporary classical music, but she never forgot the circumstances that had launched her career. She frequently returned to perform at the Belmont Country Club, using these appearances to raise additional funds for music education, while maintaining connections to the community that had first recognized her talent. Elena's influence extended beyond her individual performances to include mentorship of young artists facing similar challenges. She established a scholarship fund for adult learners seeking to return to musical studies after career interruptions, while her master classes addressed both technical and practical aspects of building a sustainable career in classical music. The psychological journey accompanying Elena's career transformation required ongoing attention and professional support. The rapid transition from invisibility to celebrity created stresses that Elena had not anticipated, while the constant travel and performance pressures sometimes threatened the work-life balance she had worked so hard to establish. Elena found that maintaining her emotional well-being required deliberate effort to stay connected to the values and relationships that had sustained her during more difficult times. Regular visits with former colleagues from the music store and country club helped her remember her roots, while continued involvement in local community organizations kept her grounded in practical realities beyond the rarefied world of professional classical music. Sophia's presence provided Elena with constant reminders of what truly mattered in life. No matter how successful her performances or how positive the critical reviews, Elena's primary identity remained centered on her role as Sophia's mother. This perspective helped her navigate the ego challenges and competitive pressures that could have otherwise compromised her artistic integrity. The evolution of Elena's artistic voice continued throughout her developing career, with each new project revealing additional facets of her musical personality. Her collaborations with contemporary composers resulted in several new works written specifically for her interpretive strengths, while her exploration of historically informed performance practices added scholarly depth to her artistic development. Elena's commitment to musical education extended beyond advocacy and fundraising to include direct teaching responsibilities. She accepted a part-time faculty position at the local music conservatory, where her unconventional background and unique perspectives enriched the educational experience for students who might never encounter such diverse viewpoints in traditional academic settings. Her teaching philosophy emphasized the importance of finding personal meaning in musical expression rather than simply pursuing technical perfection. Elena encouraged her students to draw upon their own life experiences when interpreting classical repertoire, believing that authentic emotion was more valuable than flawless execution. This approach produced graduates who possessed both technical competence and the ability to communicate meaningfully with audiences. The long-term impact of Elena's emergence as a major classical artist extended far beyond her individual success. Her story inspired countless other people to pursue deferred dreams and to believe that extraordinary achievements were possible regardless of current circumstances. Music schools reported increased enrollment in adult education programs, while community orchestras saw growing participation from amateur musicians who had been motivated by Elena's example. Elena's autobiography, published 5 years after her breakthrough performance, became a bestseller and was translated into multiple languages. The book detailed not only her musical journey but also her experiences as a single mother navigating career challenges while maintaining family priorities. Readers around the world found inspiration in her story, while aspiring musicians gained practical insights into building sustainable careers in the arts. The foundation that Elena established to support music education eventually grew into a national organization with chapters in major cities across the country. The foundation's programs included instrument lending libraries, scholarship funds, and mentorship networks that connected established professionals with emerging artists. Elena's vision of making music education accessible regardless of economic background became a reality through the foundation's comprehensive support systems. Sophia's own musical development continued to flourish under her mother's guidance and the excellent educational opportunities that Elena's success had provided. By age 10, Sophia was performing in youth orchestras and competitions, displaying natural talent combined with the work ethic and emotional intelligence she had learned from observing her mother's career development. Elena was careful to ensure that Sophia's musical activities remained enjoyable rather than becoming sources of pressure or stress. She had witnessed too many young musicians burn out from excessive expectations and competitive intensity, and she was determined that Sophia would develop a healthy relationship with musical expression regardless of her ultimate career choices. The legacy of that transformative evening at the Belmont Country Club continued to resonate throughout Elena's career and personal life. She never took for granted the courage that had been required to step forward and claim her artistic identity, and she frequently spoke about the importance of recognizing moments when life offers opportunities for fundamental change. Elena's story became a symbol of hope for people facing their own crossroads, proof that it was never too late to pursue authentic dreams and that extraordinary achievements could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. Her music continued to touch audiences around the world, while her advocacy work ensured that future generations of musicians would have access to the educational opportunities that could help them realize their own artistic potential. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.